for the introduction, and actually thanks to Lee. I thought it was a great presentation, actually, and I think I'll actually pick up on some of what Lee talked about. As you know, I'm the General Manager for Networks and Communications, and actually I need this. I'm going to talk to you about driving customer experience through the yin and yang of digital transformation. I've tried to make this as specific to customer experience as I can, given obviously this is the track, but it will be a bit broader than that. And I make no apologies for that, actually, because I think digital transformation is wider than customer experience. So I'll try and do both at the same time. So what I'm going to cover, I'm going to start off and give a view on how digital transformation can impact customer experience. I think it can impact it in lots of ways, but I'm just going to sort of throw out the top three that actually means that digital transformation makes a direct impact on customers. The next thing I'm going to do is talk about actually how you can all drive digital transformation in your own organizations. And actually I use this theory around yin and yang, these two different concepts, which I'll explain at the time. And then the last thing that I'm going to do is give some sort of practical recommendations and suggestions on how to take digital transformation forward in your own organizations. I suspect it'll touch on a load of the things that Lee said. It'll probably also touch on a load of things that other people have said during the last day or so. So hopefully it's consistent, and hopefully you get something new from it as well. So that's what I'm going to cover. So before I do any of that, though, I just wanted to give a bit more background on Zen. Anyone heard of Zen? Zen Internet or Zen? One or two hands? Okay, it's a good job I put this slide in then. So basically, we're a managed service provider, so we provide a whole range of different services. We're also an internet service provider, so you can buy Zen Internet at home. We've been around for about 20 odd years. We're independent. We've grown consistently over that time. We've got about 500 staff now, about 1,500 business customers, and we provide a whole range of different things, but I've sort of summarized some of them there. So we provide networks, like your traditional networks, your software-defined networks, connectivity services around broadband and Ethernet. We provide cloud services, so we help organizations move their infrastructure and their services into the cloud, and we provide a whole range of different voice services. So that's all I'm going to say about Zen. This isn't a big sales pitch on Zen, but I just wanted to give a bit of context of who we are as an organization, because I think it helps inform some of this. So, as I said, the first thing I wanted to talk about was how does digital transformation directly impact customer experience? And as I said, there's three things in my mind. First thing is it creates insight. So it develops lots of data, lots of real-time data, data in lots of places, data in lots of different devices, data from lots of different customers. And actually, digital transformation gives you the opportunity to take that data and turn it into insight that you can use. It basically tells you what can you do to drive forward your customer experience. So the first thing that digital transformation does for customer experience is it creates the insight. The second thing it does is it gives you the toolkit, which means you can implement and execute on that insight. So there's a whole range, and it was interesting what Lee said about the mobile being dead. I don't disagree with that, but I think at the moment, that is a toolkit for implementing some digital transformation, and actually those toolkits are constantly evolving. But clearly, within digital transformation, there's a whole range of different things and tools that you can use to implement. I think those two are fairly obvious, but I think the third one is probably a bit less obvious, because actually I think it gives you a burning platform. It basically changes customers' expectations to such an extent that actually you have to engage in digital transformation, because if you don't, you get left behind. So actually, I think that is as equally important to the first two. So as I say, it creates the insight, it gives you a toolkit to implement on that insight, and probably most importantly, it gives you that burning platform both internally and with your customers to execute on that insight. So like I say, there's others, but those are the key ones in my mind. More than happy to be challenged on this at the end, or in the panel discussion this afternoon if people think I've missed anything. So if that is how digital transformation impacts on customer experience, how should you drive digital transformation? Now, I use this analogy, but I'm conscious that not everyone understands exactly what it is. And I would put it out there, in no way am I an expert on Chinese philosophy. So apologies if anyone is, and I misinterpret it. But basically, yin and yang are two opposing forces that actually work together, and actually together drive more than the sum of their parts. And in Chinese philosophy, that's that energy that's created creates the universe, whereas actually for us, it works really well from a digital transformation. And I'll sort of explain what that means, because we think there's two different forces. So there's the technologies, and I'm sure people have talked a lot about the technologies, and then there's the culture and engagement. And actually you have to get both elements right, and you have to get both elements working together to drive that energy which drives forward effective digital transformation. So the crux of the yin and yang of digital transformation is these two opposing forces which you have to get right, and both are equally important, and you have to understand how they work together to drive momentum. And I'll on a very high level, and I have tried to keep this purposefully high level, so apologies if people think it's a bit too high level. More than happy to sort of build on it a bit afterwards, but I'm going to talk a little bit about what I mean by the technologies and what I mean by the culture and engagement. So the technologies, and this isn't an exhaustive list, but I think these are the key ones, and I think probably from the show of hands before, I think most people are probably aware of all of these. They're the obvious ones, but I think they're the right ones. So the cloud is the first thing. The cloud changes the way organizations think and the way they act, the way they implement, and absolutely that underpins digital transformation. It absolutely has to. And that's in terms of moving infrastructure, it's also in terms of applications, it's right across the piece. But that's not all, and I think sometimes organizations do think actually digital transformation, well what is it? Oh, I'll move my infrastructure into the cloud and that's digital transformation done. It is much wider than that. And the other things that I've pulled out here, ubiquitous connectivity I think is really important. The reason that this is important is it means that digital transformation isn't something that just happens in head office, it's something that is actually done in people's homes, in people's offices, in people's cars, it's everywhere. You need that ubiquitous connectivity to be able to connect all those different people and their devices and bring it all together to generate that insight that I talked about at the start. So the second one is ubiquitous connectivity. Third one is big data. Data is absolutely key to this, and as I talked about at the start in terms of the insight, you need to understand what you're doing with the data, how you're developing it, how you're cultivating it, how you're protecting it, how you're developing the value of it. That's absolutely key. And then the last one is AI, and I'd group machine learning in that, and I'm sure there's been other presentations on that already. For me, the importance of that is partly about understanding a differentiation in the market, but AI gives you the opportunity to maintain and develop that differentiation in the longer term. So AI is really the fourth key technology. Like I say, it's not an exhaustive list. I've just tried to pull out the biggest ones that we look at and that our customers look at, and the ones that drive the most value. So that's, as I say, the yin, which is the technologies. I also said the yang. So as I say, I've purposefully called it out separately because I think organizations need to look at it separately. You need to look at what those technologies are, and you also need to look at this. You need to be clear on actually, have you got the culture and the engagement right across your organization? The first element of this is a vision. So being really clear within your organization on what are you trying to achieve by digital transformation? Where is it taking you? What's the real benefit? What's the use case? What's the actual difference that it's going to make versus today? And articulating that in a way that is well understood across your organization. It shouldn't just be something that's a very detailed technical document. It shouldn't be something that's very high level that the board look at. It needs to be done in a way that people across the organization understand what the vision is. The second point is about making technology a board level function, and that's key really in order to make the board understand the value that technology and digital transformation can bring. Lots of organizations don't do this and they just look at it as a cost center. If you do that, you won't succeed. To really drive the value from this, you need to elevate it in the organization. The third point is education and investing in skills. I think This is a problem in lots of organizations. You need your staff to be engaged, you need them to be upskilled, you need them to be skilled in the right areas to make the most of digital transformation. And the last point I'd raise is encouraging experimentation. So you can get all those other things in place and you can get all the technologies in place, but actually unless you actually build a culture and encourage your people to experiment and to fail fast and to learn from it and to innovate, it's a bit like what Lee said about the sort of the innovation groups, you won't succeed. So a very sort of quick run through, but hopefully that illustrates our sort of thinking around the sort of yin-yang. And as I said before, the idea of this is that you understand what these differences are and the real need to focus at these different groups, but understand importantly how those things work together to drive that energy and that momentum which drives those three things on the left-hand side there, which directly impact customer experience. So hopefully that makes sense. Like I say, more than happy to go into this in more detail afterwards. But I wanted to finish with some recommendations on how to take this forward. I'm a bit short on time, so I might run through some of this quite fast, but let's see how we go. So the first thing I'd say is learn from the research. And I'm sure, there's been lots of references to research in over the last couple of days. There's loads of research out there around digital transformation. We did some research ourselves because we actively wanted to help our customers with digital transformation. And these are the four top things that came out in terms of what does digital transformation mean for them. The one I would focus on, and I'd suggest everyone focuses, is the one on the top left, because that's the widest one, and that's really using digital transformation to drive innovation across your organization. It's not just about going paperless. It's not just about specific technology. It's using it as a cultural change to drive innovation in your organization. Another thing that came out of the research, we basically asked organizations how they were getting on with it, what their approach was. And actually it was quite clear that a lot of organizations are overconfident. They think, actually, I've done digital transformation, or actually, I'm way ahead of my competitors, and actually, I understand it in a way that none of my competitors do. That might be right for some organizations, but I can tell you that there can't be 60% of organizations that think they're ahead of their competitors. The maths just don't work. So I think there is an overconfidence, and I also think there's a lot of organizations that think, I needed to do digital transformation. I did it in those few weeks. It's done now. We've moved on to something else. I think if you're doing that, then you've potentially missed a trick, and there's wider learnings and wider things that you can achieve through digital transformation. But another thing that came out of the research was that nearly half of organizations thought they'd finished digital transformation. Other things from the research, and like I say, I've just pulled out a few things from the research that we've done, and I'm more than happy to share the outputs in more detail as well. The biggest opportunities is about efficiency, cost, and collaboration. Now, I was in two minds about including that in this presentation because it's about customer experience. And I thought, well, actually, those things aren't really directly customer experience, but they are. They absolutely are. Increased efficiency obviously benefits customers. Reduced cost means that you can invest costs in other places that benefit customers more. And actually, increased collaboration is both increased collaboration within an organization, but also with customers. So on one hand, they are relevant to customer experience, but the other reason I left them in there is I think if you're looking at digital transformation, you need a wide set of things to justify it on, and it's wider than customer experience. So look at other opportunities to justify digital transformation. Last bit of output from the research was about biggest roadblocks. So budget was the biggest one, and legacy systems and poor connectivity. I've talked about connectivity. The legacy systems and the budget, I think there's a number of approaches to that. One of them is to do it in a much more sort of phased approach, and it comes back to the vision that I talked about before. So in the interest of time, I'll scoot on, but the first element in terms of guidance to take this forward is learn from all these conversations and the research that's out there. The second one is to agree an approach, and I've pretty much outlined our thinking on that. So think of those impacts, what they are to your own organization, what insight are you trying to create, what's the toolkit that you're trying to use, and have you got a burning platform, and what is it? Or what's the parameters of it? What does it mean to your organization? So think about the impacts. Once you've done that, identify the technologies and the culture and the engagement you need to get in place for it to be successful in your organization. which obviously I stepped through in terms of the yin and yang. And then the last thing, which I touched on previously in terms of the research, is allocate resource. So that might be people, it might be budget, but it's resource, and you need to allocate that at the start. So the second element in terms of taking this forward is agree an approach. The third element is a note of warning. And I chose Spider-Man to give you this warning, but actually I could have probably chosen another character. The reason I chose Spider-Man is Spider-Man's uncle says that with great power comes great responsibility. And this is a big note of caution in all of this. In developing customer experience through digital transformation, you can make a mess of it. And there's plenty of examples out there where organizations have made a mess of it. And actually what you can do is make customer experience worse than it was before. So in activating this and implementing it, please think about this. Think about how are you benefiting customers, but also what's the risk that you could actually make it worse. And then on my final slide, and I did say I wasn't going to talk too much about Zen, and I'm not, but Zen is obviously a partner that can do some of this stuff. It's not the right partner for all organizations, but some of the things I would suggest that you look at if you are interested in partnering with organizations is you look for the one with the right technologies that fit to those technologies you're looking to develop. The right experience and referenceability. So this isn't about the right marketing materials. It's about getting underneath that and understanding actually which customers have they worked with, what impacts have they driven. The right service, which is key to this, both in terms of implementing, but also I'm thinking more longer term as you look to manage it in life. And then last but not least, I would say the right people, because you need people that you're going to work with, that your teams are going to work with to drive this forward effectively. So that's the final bit of my recommendations is, like I say, so it was around, that note of warning. It was about learning from the research, choosing the right partner, and agreeing that high level approach. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, James. We do have a few minutes if there are any questions. Any questions?
No?
Yep.
Hi, James. Good presentation there.
Thank you.
Question on the approach. What's your sort of view or take in terms of how you measure that? So when you said in terms of getting your outputs, so where I'm going specifically is more of the capabilities. If you choose to adopt X, Y, Z technologies, but you mentioned the cultural aspects, etc. How do you go about measuring that suite of capabilities to ensure you're on the right track and you're making progress at the right rate?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think it's a bit like Lee's answer to one of the questions as well. I think it has to vary quite a lot on the individual circumstance and what it is you're trying to achieve. I think, yeah, it really depends how you're implementing it, but I think you have to be very clear up front on what those KPIs are, but not just that. It's KPIs, but it's linked to those specific outcomes and making sure that you've got a process that's in place that is running throughout so that it's not just actually, we've said this is going to take a week, we're going to measure it through this time, and then you stop the measuring, you set it up, you get the team in place, you try and formalize it as much as you can, you try and include the stakeholders, you try and link a measure directly to the outputs that you're trying to achieve, and then, as I say, run it through the process. We could probably talk about it in a bit more detail because it is difficult. It depends exactly what you're trying to achieve. But in general, I think it's about that clarity and linking it to the outcomes and not just looking at it as we're going to run this for a week or a month. This is a longer term process.
James, thank you very much. Cheers.
Yeah.